If you're drawn to stories about betrayal that cuts deeper than you ever imagined possible, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. This ending will stay with you long after it's over. My name is Marcus Chen, and I'm about to tell you how I watched my brother destroy our father for money and learned a devastating truth about family that I wish I'd never discovered. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about what happens when you realize that the person you thought you knew best is capable of unthinkable cruelty. It started with a phone call at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday in October 2023. Dad had collapsed at home and been rushed to Seattle's Harbor Medical Center with what the doctors suspected was a massive stroke. By the time I got there from my apartment across town, he was in the ICU, hooked up to more machines than I could count. Unconscious but stable. My older brother Derek was already there, pacing in the waiting room with his wife Amanda. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the few hours since Dad's collapse. Our younger sister Emily was flying in from Boston and wouldn't arrive until morning. "How bad is it?" I asked, though I was terrified of the answer. "Bad," Derek said, his voice hollow. "The doctors say there's significant brain damage. They don't know if he'll wake up, and if he does, they don't know what kind of condition he'll be in." Dad was 68 years old and had always been healthy as a horse. He ran marathons, ate right, never smoked. This wasn't supposed to happen to him. He was supposed to have another 20 years to enjoy his retirement and watch his grandchildren grow up. But as we sat in that sterile waiting room, watching the sun come up over Seattle, none of us had any idea that Dad's medical crisis was about to reveal something far worse than any stroke could cause. The first hint came when Derek pulled me aside while Amanda went to get coffee. "We need to talk about Dad's financial situation," he said quietly. "Now, Derek, he's fighting for his life in there, which is exactly why we need to talk about this now. Someone needs to make decisions, and we need to understand what we're dealing with." I didn't like the way he said, "what we're dealing with," like Dad was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be saved. But I was exhausted and scared, so I let him continue. "Dad gave me power of attorney last year," Derek explained. "If he's incapacitated, I'm legally authorized to make medical and financial decisions on his behalf." "Okay, so what are you saying?" Derek glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "The doctors say that even if Dad wakes up, he'll likely need full-time care. We're talking nursing homes, rehabilitation, possibly years of expensive medical treatment. And Dad has good insurance and retirement savings," I said. "He planned for this kind of thing. That's what I need to talk to you about." Derek pulled out his phone and showed me what looked like bank statements. "Dad's financial situation isn't what we thought." What Derek showed me would have been shocking on its own, but it was nothing compared to what I'd discover about what my brother had been doing and what he was planning to do next. According to the documents Derek showed me, Dad had approximately $1.2 million in retirement accounts, a house worth about $600,000 with no mortgage, and another $300,000 in various investments. On paper, he was set for a comfortable retirement and more than capable of affording whatever care he might need. "So, what's the problem?" I asked. "The problem is that this money is supposed to be our inheritance," Derek said. "If Dad needs full-time care for the next 10 or 15 years, there won't be anything left." I stared at my brother, trying to process what he'd just said. Our father was lying in a hospital bed, his life hanging by a thread, and Derek was worried about his inheritance. "Are you serious right now?" I asked. "Marcus, think about it. Dad's already 68. Even if he recovers, his quality of life is going to be terrible. Is it really fair to drain his entire estate, keeping him alive, when he'd probably rather just let go?" Let go. I felt sick. "Derek, he's not brain dead. The doctors haven't even finished all their tests yet. We don't know what his prognosis is. I talked to Dr. Morrison while you were parking. She said that even in the best-case scenario, Dad will never be independent again. He'll need someone to feed him, dress him, probably help him use the bathroom. Is that really a life worth living?" That's not your decision to make, I said firmly. Actually, it is. I have power of attorney. I'm legally authorized to make these decisions. And that's when Amanda returned with the coffee, and Derek immediately changed the subject. But something in his eyes told me this conversation wasn't over. It was just beginning. Over the next few days, as we waited for Dad to show signs of waking up, I started noticing things that made me deeply uncomfortable. Derek was spending a lot of time on his phone, having hushed conversations he'd end whenever I came near. He'd disappear for hours at a time, claiming he was taking care of business matters related to Dad's care. When Emily finally arrived, exhausted from her red-eye flight, I pulled her aside and told her about my conversation with Derek. "He can't be serious," Emily said, her face pale. "We're not going to just give up on Dad because it might cost money." "I don't think that's what he's suggesting," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed that. "But I think we need to keep a close eye on what he's doing. He's acting strange." Emily and I made a pact to stay involved in every decision, to make sure Derek didn't do anything without consulting us first. But we were already too late. Derek had been making moves we didn't know about, and by the time we discovered what he'd done, the damage was irreversible. The truth came out on the 4th day, when a social worker came to talk to us about Dad's care options. The social worker's name was Janet Morrison, and she looked confused when Emily and I sat down with her in the family conference room. "I'm glad you're both here," she said carefully, "but I was under the impression that Derek Chen was handling all care decisions for your father." "We're all involved in Dad's care," Emily said. "Why? Is there a problem?" Janet hesitated. "I probably shouldn't say this, but you should know that Derek has already signed a DNR order for your father." "A what?" I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "A Do Not Resuscitate order. It means that if your father's heart stops or he stops breathing, the medical team won't perform CPR or take any measures to revive him." Emily's face went white. "When did this happen?" "Yesterday afternoon. Derek came in while you were both gone and said the family had decided it was the most humane course of action given your father's prognosis." "We never decided anything," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "Where is he? Where's Derek?" "We found him in Dad's room, sitting beside the bed, holding Dad's hand like he was the devoted son keeping vigil. The sight of it made me want to scream." "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Outside. Now." Derek followed us into the hallway, and the moment we were out of earshot of other families, I confronted him. "A DNR order? Are you kidding me right now?" "It's what Dad would have wanted," Derek said calmly. "He told me years ago that he never wanted to be kept alive by machines." "He's not being kept alive by machines," Emily shot back. "He's recovering from a stroke. That's not the same thing. The doctors say he might not wake up, and if he does, he'll be a vegetable. Do you really want to watch him suffer like that?" "You don't get to make this decision alone," I said. "You should have talked to us first. I have power of attorney. I don't need your permission." That's when Emily said the words that would change everything. "Why are you so eager for Dad to die, Derek?" The question hung in the air like poison. Derek's face went through several emotions: anger, defensiveness, and finally, something that looked almost like fear. "That's a terrible thing to say," he said quietly. "Then prove me wrong," Emily challenged. "Revoke the DNR. Let Dad have a chance to recover." "I'm not going to do that." "Why not?" I asked. "What aren't you telling us?" Derek was silent for a long moment. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "You don't understand the financial pressures I'm under right now." We made Derek sit down in an empty waiting room and explain exactly what he meant by financial pressures. What he told us was worse than anything I'd imagined. For the past 3 years, Derek had been making increasingly risky investments in cryptocurrency and tech startups. He'd started with his own money, but when those investments went south, he'd begun borrowing. Not from banks, from private lenders who charged exorbitant interest rates and didn't ask too many questions. "How much do you owe?" Emily asked, though her voice suggested she didn't really want to know. "About $800,000, Derek admitted. "And if I don't pay it back soon, they're threatening to go after my house, my business, everything. So you thought you'd just let Dad die and use your inheritance to pay off your gambling debts?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "It's not like that," Derek insisted. "Dad's going to die anyway. The doctor said his prognosis is poor. I'm just being realistic about the situation." "No," Emily said firmly. "You're being selfish. This isn't about Dad's quality of life. This is about you needing money. You don't understand what it's like," Derek said, and for the first time he sounded desperate. "These people I owe money to, they're not patient. They've already started making threats. I need that money, and I need it soon." "Then get a loan," I said. "Declare bankruptcy. Do literally anything except try to kill our father for his money." "I'm not trying to kill him," Derek protested. "I'm just not going to extraordinary measures to keep him alive when his quality of life will be non-existent anyway." But we all knew that was a lie. The DNR wasn't about Dad's dignity or quality of life. It was about Derek's debt and his desperate need for an inheritance that Dad was still alive to use himself. "I'm going to ask you one more time," I said. "Revoke the DNR. Let Dad recover or not recover on his own terms, not on your financial timeline." "And if I don't?" "Then I'm calling a lawyer," Emily said. "We'll challenge your power of attorney. We'll make sure Dad gets every chance to survive, and we'll make sure everyone knows what you tried to do." Derek looked between us, calculating his options. Finally, he said, "Fine, I'll revoke the DNR, but you're making a mistake. You'll see." He left to find the social worker, and Emily and I sat in that waiting room, trying to process what our brother had just admitted. "He's actually willing to let Dad die for money," Emily whispered. "Our own brother." But Derek's confession was only the beginning. What we discovered over the next few days would reveal that his betrayal went much deeper and had started much earlier than either of us imagined. While Derek dealt with revoking the DNR order, Emily and I decided to do some investigating of our own. If Derek was in enough financial trouble to consider letting Dad die, we needed to know the full extent of what was going on. Emily, being a forensic accountant in her day job, knew exactly where to look. With Dad's power of attorney documents, which named Derek as primary but listed Emily and me as successors, we were able to access Dad's financial records. What we found made us sick. For the past 18 months, Derek had been systematically draining Dad's accounts. Small amounts at first, $5,000 here, $10,000 there. But in recent months, the amounts had gotten larger. In total, Derek had stolen nearly $400,000 from Dad's retirement accounts. "How did Dad not notice?" I asked as we reviewed the statements in Emily's hotel room. "Look at the timing." Emily pointed to the dates on the transactions. "They all happened after Dad gave Derek power of attorney last year. Derek was probably handling Dad's finances by then, so Dad never saw these statements." "But why would Dad give him power of attorney if he was still healthy?" Emily pulled up another document, Dad's medical records from 15 months ago. Dad was diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's. The doctors said he was still competent, but he wanted to start putting his affairs in order while he still could. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they created was horrifying. Derek had waited until Dad was vulnerable, convinced him to sign over power of attorney, and then begun stealing from him. The stroke wasn't just a medical crisis. For Derek, it was a convenient way to cover his tracks permanently. "We need to confront him," I said. "We need to call the police," Emily corrected. "This is elder abuse. This is theft. This is—" She couldn't finish the sentence. But before we could do either, Derek showed up at Emily's hotel room. His face was pale and his hands were shaking. "We need to talk," he said. "Something's happened." Derek looked like he'd aged 10 years since we'd seen him that morning. He sat down heavily on the hotel room couch and put his head in his hands. "Dad woke up," he said. Emily and I exchanged glances. That should have been good news. Great news, even. But the way Derek said it made it clear something was very wrong. That's good, isn't it?" Emily asked carefully. "The doctors say he's awake, but he's not responsive. He can't speak, can barely move. They're saying the stroke damage was more extensive than they thought." "But he's alive," I said. "That's what matters." Derek looked up at me with something like desperation in his eyes. He's not going to recover, Marcus. The doctors are talking about permanent care facilities, feeding tubes, years of expensive treatment for someone who's never going to be able to recognize his own children. You don't know that, Emily said firmly. Recovery from stroke can take months. He might improve. He won't, Derek insisted. I talked to the neurologist. The damage is too severe. Dad's essentially going to be a living corpse, and we're supposed to just watch him suffer, while his estate gets drained paying for care he wouldn't want. How convenient, I said coldly. Now you don't even need him to die. You just need us to agree to pull the plug. Derek's face flushed. That's not fair. What's not fair is stealing $400,000 from our father, Emily said quietly. The color drained from Derek's face. You went through his accounts. We're co-successors on his power of attorney, Emily said. We had every right. And we found everything, Derek. Every transfer, every withdrawal. $400,000 over 18 months. Derek stood up, his hands clenched into fists. I was going to pay it back. With what money? I demanded. The inheritance you'd get if Dad conveniently died before anyone noticed what you'd done. I didn't cause his stroke, Derek said defensively. No, Emily agreed. But you saw it as an opportunity, didn't you? A way to cover up your theft and get access to the rest of his money. Derek's face crumbled. For a moment, I thought he might actually break down and confess everything, apologize, beg for forgiveness. Instead, he said something that made my blood run cold. If you report me, I'll make sure Dad's care gets cut off entirely. I still have power of attorney, and I still have the legal authority to make medical decisions. You want to play hardball, I can make Dad's last days very uncomfortable. You wouldn't, Emily whispered. Try me, Derek said and walked out. After he left, Emily and I sat in stunned silence. Our brother, the person we'd grown up with, shared a childhood with, trusted, was threatening to torture our father unless we let him get away with theft and potential murder. We have to go to the police, I said. If we do, Derek might follow through on his threat, Emily said. God, Marcus, he could order them to stop Dad's pain medication, reduce his care. The power of attorney gives him that authority. We were trapped. Report Derek and risk him retaliating against Dad, or stay silent and watch him get away with one of the worst betrayals imaginable. But we didn't know that Dad himself was about to make the choice for us. The next morning, I went to visit Dad in the ICU during early visiting hours. He looked small in the hospital bed, tubes and wires connecting him to various machines. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. I sat beside him and took his hand, the way I'd done countless times when I was a kid, and he was teaching me to ride a bike or helping me with homework. Hey, Dad, I said softly. It's Marcus. I don't know if you can hear me, but we're going to figure this out. We're going to take care of you. To my shock, Dad's hand squeezed mine, weakly, but definitely a squeeze. Dad, can you hear me? Another squeeze. My heart was racing. The doctors had said he was minimally conscious, unresponsive, but he was definitely trying to communicate. I pressed the call button for the nurse, and when she arrived, I explained what had happened. She ran some tests, shining lights in Dad's eyes, asking him to squeeze her hand, to blink if he could understand her. Mr. Chen, she said clearly, can you hear me? Blink once for yes. Dad blinked once. Oh my God, I breathed. The nurse called for the neurologist, who ran more extensive tests. After about an hour, Dr. Morrison came to talk to me in the hallway. Your father is much more aware than we initially thought, she said. He can't speak, and his motor control is severely limited, but he appears to understand what's being said to him. So he's been conscious this whole time? We believe so, yes. I'm sorry we didn't catch this earlier. Sometimes stroke patients can be locked in, fully aware but unable to communicate normally, which meant Dad had heard everything. Every conversation we'd had about his prognosis, his care, his finances, every word of Derek's confession about the money and his debts. He'd heard his own son admit to stealing from him and plotting to let him die. I need to talk to him, I said, alone. Dr. Morrison set me up with a system. Dad could blink once for yes, twice for no, 3 times if he wanted to spell something out letter by letter. It was slow and exhausting for him, but it worked. I sat beside Dad and asked the question I both needed and dreaded to ask. Dad, did you hear our conversations yesterday? About Derek and the money? 1 blink. Yes. Are you aware that Derek has been taking money from your accounts? 1 blink. Yes. My heart sank. How long have you known? Dad blinked 3 times. He wanted to spell something. With the nurse's help, we slowly decoded his message, 1 letter at a time. Always. He'd always known. Derek hadn't been as clever as he thought. Dad had known his son was stealing from him, and he'd said nothing. Why didn't you stop him? I asked, though I was afraid I knew the answer. 3 blinks again. Another message. Loved him. I called Emily immediately and told her everything. We came back together to visit Dad, and slowly, painfully, through the system of blinks and spelled-out words, Dad told us a story that broke our hearts. He'd known about Derek's financial troubles. Derek had come to him 2 years ago, admitted he'd made bad investments, and asked for help. Dad had refused to just give him money. He'd wanted Derek to learn responsibility, to deal with the consequences of his choices. But Dad had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's around the same time. He'd known his memory and judgment would start declining, so he'd given Derek power of attorney, thinking it would help his son feel trusted and responsible. Instead, Derek had seen it as an opportunity. Dad had noticed the missing money about a year ago. He'd confronted Derek, who'd broken down and begged for more time, promising to pay it all back. Dad, still loving his son despite everything, had agreed to give him time. But I was going to change the power of attorney, Dad spelled out. Before stroke, he'd planned to remove Derek's authority and split it between Emily and me instead. He'd even drafted the documents. They were in his home office, unsigned, waiting for a notary appointment he never got to keep. What do you want us to do now? Emily asked, tears streaming down her face. About Derek, about the money, about everything. Dad's response was 3 blinks. He spelled out 1 word, forgive. Dad, no, I said. He stole from you. He tried to let you die. We can't just forgive that. But Dad was insistent. Through painstaking communication, he made his wishes clear. He didn't want us to report Derek to the police. He didn't want to press charges or pursue the stolen money. He wanted us to forgive Derek and help him, because that's what family did. Family doesn't steal from each other, Emily argued. Family doesn't plot murder. Dad's next message stopped us cold. He is still my son, still your brother. Family breaks. Family forgives. Family heals. But what about justice? I asked. Dad's eyes met mine with startling clarity. Justice or family? Choose. It was an impossible choice. Do what was morally right and legally necessary. Turn Derek in, let him face the consequences of his actions, or honor Dad's dying wish to keep the family together. Emily and I went back to her hotel room to discuss what to do. We stayed up all night, arguing, crying, trying to figure out the right answer to a question that had no good solutions. By morning, we'd made our decision. But we both knew that whatever we chose, someone was going to end up hurt, and our family would never be the same. We asked Derek to meet us at a coffee shop near the hospital. He came looking haggard, like he hadn't slept in days. Maybe he hadn't. Dad can communicate, I told him without preamble. He's been aware this whole time. Derek's face went white. The doctors said he was unresponsive. They were wrong. He can hear, he can understand, and he's been listening to everything. I paused, letting that sink in. He knows what you did, Derek, all of it. Derek slumped in his chair like a puppet with cut strings. Oh, God. He knows about the money, about your debts, about you trying to let him die, Emily continued. And he asked us to give you a message. Derek looked up with something like hope in his eyes, though I couldn't understand how he could hope for anything at this point. He wants us to forgive you, I said. Derek's face crumpled. What? He doesn't want us to report you to the police. He doesn't want to press charges. He wants us to help you. Why? Derek whispered. After everything I've done? Because he's our father, Emily said. And apparently he loves you more than you deserve. Derek started crying then. deep, racking sobs that shook his whole body. "I'm so sorry," he kept saying. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry isn't enough," I said coldly. "But we're going to honor Dad's wishes anyway. Here's what's going to happen." Emily pulled out the documents we'd prepared. "You're going to sign over power of attorney to Marcus and me, effective immediately. You're going to sell your house and whatever other assets you have to pay back, as much of the $400,000 as possible. You're going to get a real job and set up a payment plan for the rest. And you're going to spend every day of the rest of Dad's life being the son he deserves," I added. "You're going to visit him, care for him, and show him that his forgiveness wasn't misplaced." "What if I can't pay back the money?" Derek asked. "The people I owe, they're not going to wait." "Then you tell them the truth," Emily interrupted. "You tell them you made bad investments and you're broke. You declare bankruptcy if you have to, but you don't steal from your dying father to pay off gambling debts." Derek looked at the documents, then at us. "And if I don't agree to this, then we go to the police," I said simply, "and you go to prison for elder abuse and theft. Dad's forgiveness only extends as far as your willingness to actually change." Derek signed the documents with shaking hands. As he handed them back, he asked the question I'd been dreading. "Does Dad hate me?" I thought about Dad's message, about his insistence on forgiveness over justice. "No," I admitted. "He doesn't hate you. He loves you. Which is why this hurts so much." Derek left the coffee shop a broken man, and honestly, I felt no sympathy for him. But as Emily and I sat there finishing our cold coffee, I couldn't help but wonder if we'd made the right choice. Was forgiveness really more important than justice? Was keeping a family together worth letting someone get away with such terrible betrayal? We were about to find out that Dad's health was about to give us an answer neither of us expected. Dad died 3 weeks later. Not from the stroke, but from a sudden brain hemorrhage the doctors said was probably a delayed complication. He went peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by his children. All 3 of us were there when it happened. Even Derek, who had spent every day of those 3 weeks visiting Dad, helping with his care, and slowly trying to rebuild the trust he'd shattered. In those final weeks, Dad had continued to improve. He'd regained some speech, just a few words, but they were enough. And what he chose to say in those last conversations changed everything. "Not your fault," he told Derek one afternoon when the 2 of them were alone. Derek told us about it later, tears streaming down his face. "Good boy. Once. Find him. Again." Dad had known he was dying. The doctors told us later that he'd probably known all along that he wouldn't recover. But he'd fought to stay alive long enough to give Derek what he needed most, not forgiveness for what he'd done, but faith that he could be better. After the funeral, Emily, Derek, and I met with Dad's lawyer to go through the will. What we discovered was that Dad had changed it shortly before his stroke, during that window when he still had legal capacity, but after he'd learned about Derek's theft. Dad had left the house to Emily. His retirement accounts were split between Emily and me. And Derek received $1 and a letter. Emily and I watched as Derek opened the letter with shaking hands. After he'd read it, tears falling on the paper, he handed it to us without a word. "My son Derek, by the time you read this, you'll know that I discovered your theft. You'll know that I chose to forgive you rather than punish you. I hope you'll understand why I'm not leaving you an inheritance. It's not because I stopped loving you. It's because giving you money would be the cruelest thing I could do. You need to learn that you can survive without taking shortcuts, without stealing, without compromising your integrity for financial gain. The $1 I'm leaving you is symbolic. It's proof that I didn't forget you, that this wasn't an accident or oversight. You are my son, and you will always be my son. But the best gift I can give you is the chance to build your own life, earn your own money, and become the man I know you can be. I loved you enough to let you fail. I loved you enough to not enable your worst impulses. And I loved you enough to believe that you can recover from this and become better. But that's on you now. Make me proud, Dad." We sat in that lawyer's office, the 3 of us, processing what Dad had done. He'd found a way to forgive Derek while still holding him accountable. He'd chosen to believe in redemption while refusing to enable destruction. He was a better man than all of us, Derek said quietly. He was right. Dad had found a middle path between justice and mercy, between family loyalty and personal responsibility. He'd refused to let Derek's betrayal destroy him, but he'd also refused to let Derek avoid the consequences of his actions. 2 years later, Derek has paid back about $200,000 of what he stole. He works 2 jobs and lives in a small apartment. He's in therapy, attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings and slowly rebuilding his life. Emily and I help him when we can, not with money, but with support, with family dinners, with the knowledge that we haven't given up on him. Is it enough? Is justice served when the criminal gets forgiveness instead of punishment? I don't know. But I know that Dad's way, the hard way, the way of grace without enabling, gave Derek something prison never could have. The chance to become the person Dad always believed he could be. The betrayal was heartbreaking, but Dad's response to it taught us all something about love that I'll never forget. Sometimes the hardest thing you can do for someone you love is refuse to save them from themselves, while never stopping believing they can save themselves. This story proves that the worst betrayals often come from the people we trust most, but also that forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone escape consequences. True love means believing in someone's potential for redemption while refusing to enable their destruction. If this story moved you, please subscribe for more real-life accounts of families who discovered that grace and accountability aren't opposites. They're partners in the difficult work of healing. And remember, the person who betrays you might also be the person who needs your faith in them the most. Thanks for watching.